Shabbat Shalom. I am suspicious that there are certain phrases or words in Judaism that people use but don't actually know what they mean. So let's have a little test. If somebody says Yasher Koach, like we say so much during a service, what does it mean? Good job, well done. That is the interpretive meaning of it. If we were going to look for a literal meaning, koach is strength, and yashar is straight. So it's like straight strength or strengthly straight. It doesn't. That's why we interpret it in our translation. But yes, it is meant to be great job. Keep up the strength. You did wonderful. And of course, our strength is, this is not powerlifting. This is what we do through our service and what we do through our study. That's Yasher Koach worthy. On the other hand, if someone says Mazel Tov, we say good luck to like a bar mitzvah student at the end of the service. Interpretively, congratulations. But of course, closer, Bernie is right. What is a mazel? A constellation, a star sign. It's basically saying, may this be auspicious, at a good time, under the right omen. And you can see why we use an interpretive reading. And of course, it's important to understand that historically, even when Mazel Tov was used by people who knew literally what those words meant all the time, they still meant it to mean this was fortuitous in just a good luck kind of way, not that the stars were shining on you. Chag Sameach. Happy festival, right? The joy of the festival. The festival should be joyous. That one was easy. Let's try one that's a little bit harder. Never forget. Never again. I know, I switched to English and it suddenly got much harder. Well, when do we say never again in the Jewish calendar? Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust, right? Which the Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is coming up. Exactly, Monday night, Tuesday. So making sure this is in your mind and in your calendar. We say never again. We say it a lot. It used to be said even more. People have forgotten to say never forget, never again so much, but we say never again. A lot of it's in English. This should be the easy one, guys. What does it mean when we say never again? I'll take interpretation. I'm not asking for translation.
Shall this never happen again?
This shall never happen again. What's the this? Right? There's an unspoken something that isn't reoccurring in the phrase. What's the this? That if we see something with the same pattern, referring to the Shoah, to the Holocaust, that we do something to prevent that pattern from continuing to progress to the point that there is another Shoah. Great. So we all recognize the pattern then, do we? I would say no. In fact, I think most of us don't do very well on the pattern recognition for the Shoah. I mean, yes, we can all recognize millions of dead people and say, that's bad. But by the time there are millions of dead, you kind of miss the window for the never again part of never again. It's not something that should only be recognized in hindsight. Now, the reason why it's difficult to recognize the Shoah, partly is because we have done a poor job of teaching its signs, but also because the Shoah itself was a rather unusual circumstance. I know that sounds weird because it's become very fashionable to talk about, the history of genocides over the centuries and the millennia. The people have always perpetrated genocide against each other, blah, blah, blah. And that's wrong. And it's wrong, and it'll make you miss when an actual genocide is happening. Let's go back just to our own history. The Shoah was our first actual genocide. Now, we've been persecuted for an awfully long time. But that was our first genocide. Let's see if we can spot the difference. Let's go back to the biggie, the Babylonian destruction, right? 586 BCE. Genocide? No. Why did the Babylonians destroy the kingdom of Judah, and why did they destroy and displace the people of that area? Taxation. They wanted our stuff, right? They wanted our stuff. We had been saying we would give them our stuff. We did for a little while give them our stuff, and then we stopped giving them our stuff. And when you're a big, hungry empire, you need stuff. And so when we stopped, they decided to take our stuff. It's as simple as that. The Babylonians had no ideological axe to grind with us. They didn't hate our lifestyle. They didn't care about the color of our skin. They didn't care about which gods we worshipped. All they wanted was that we should continue to send money to them so they could continue to conquer others who would in turn send money to them, and the cycle would continue. Very cut and dry, very simple. They wanted our stuff. We didn't want to give it, so they made us give us our stuff, and there was a certain amount of violence involved in the process. That's what happens. The Romans. Why did the Romans occupy Judea, that insignificant province on the western side of the eastern side of the Mediterranean? Trade route. Right? You can't get from the northern parts of Asia Minor, Turkey, Syria, and all of that, which were the important areas, down into Egypt by land, unless you go through our territory. So, of course, they want that. And, of course, as long as they're there, they're going to tax us as much as they think they can get away with. And, the productivity that we generate, as well as the important coastal ports and trade routes, is going to be very useful. Nice. They wanted our stuff. I will disagree with your disagreement. The Romans are not my friends, and they're not my heroes. But they were methodical, generally speaking, give or take lunatic emperors, with what they were trying to do. Now you're right, during the Bar Kokhba revolt and during its subjugation, the Romans were especially brutal. That was because the Romans knew that if they ground a local population that had been making too much trouble into the dirt, they would stay down longer. They didn't actually try to exterminate the Jews. After all, Jews continued to live throughout the Roman Empire. And that's my point. They had no axe to grind with Judaism. They just wanted to know why this group of people there in the Eastern Mediterranean kept thinking they could rebel against the Roman Empire. I mean, even the Gauls had been pacified by this point. What were these idiots doing over there? And when we didn't learn the lesson the first couple times, they decided that after Bar Kokhba, they would teach us the lesson permanently. And it worked. And they didn't wipe us out. If they'd wanted to exterminate us to a person in the land of Israel, they could have. But they didn't, because no emperor wants to strip the land bare. You don't conquer territory to turn it into a desert. You conquer territory not for the dirt, but for the people on the territory who will turn around and work for you and provide you with money, with taxes, with slaves, with all of your productivity. But they also have to balance. How often do they have to show up and stab you to keep you from rebelling and stopping the process of wealth? And in Bar Kokhba, they calculated they were going to have to stab us an awful lot so they wouldn't have to stab us anymore for the future. That was the trade-off that they were making. Was it genocide? No. It was still ultimately an economic, imperialistic calculation. It was not about trying to wipe out the Jewish people. If they'd wanted to do that, they could have done it in Israel, and they certainly would have targeted Jews elsewhere. We can continue that argument later. The Crusades, 1,000 years after the Romans. Genocide? Why did the Crusaders crusade? For stuff. They wanted stuff. Why did they kill Jews in in Europe? Partly because they wanted our stuff. Also because it brought them status. And guess what status brings with it? Stuff. The Crusaders who massacred Jewish communities throughout Europe did so because they wanted to take the stuff those communities had. Looting has always been a popular pastime for soldiers and armies. And also because it would bring them prestige, give or take which community they were destroying and how it was related to the local Christian community. And prestige would bring them greater standing, which would bring them more stuff. And of course, the ultimate goal of the Crusades was stuff, to open up the trade routes and put them under European control, as well as to conquer new territory that would be available for settling by young nobles from Europe that wanted their own stuff. It was about stuff. But then things get a little tricky. Let's talk about Spain, the expulsion from Spain. What was going on there? A genocide? No, they gave us the option to convert or leave. They didn't just line us up and murder us. But why? Was it just about stuff? It's starting to be less and less about stuff. It's still primarily trying to secure a stable kingdom and wanting to do so under the belief that a nation-state would be best served by having a homogeneous population that was worshiping a single god. Well, that wasn't exactly a new concept, but it was becoming more feasible under a central autocratic monarchical system, and having people around who said they were Christian but were secretly still Jewish, that was uncomfortable. And so the Inquisition was begun to try and weed out those question marks. But again, if Jews had wanted to leave, they were allowed to leave. If Jews had wanted to stay and become Christian, they were allowed to stay and become Christian. It was not yet genocidal. The idea of genocide, the goal of genocide, doesn't begin to percolate into human consciousness really until the 1800s. Because in the 1800s, we begin to see a political shift in what is happening. But to understand that, we have to look back at the actual genocide of the Shoah. Why did Hitler kill the Jews and the others that he also exterminated through a concentration camp and systemic machine-like murder? Why did he do it? Was it to get our stuff? No, not really. I mean, they took the stuff as a byproduct. I mean, they're not going to say no to stuff. But it was not the purpose. And in fact, there's been many research papers that have shown that had the Jewish population been allowed to remain within the German and the German-occupied territories and produce at the level they had been producing prior to the destruction of their communities, that would have been incredibly beneficial to the Nazi regime. That the disruption caused by first the anti-Semitic laws of the Nuremberg laws and then the actual deportation and extermination of the Jews was very much shooting the Nazis in their own foot. They shot us in the head, which is worse, but they shot themselves in the foot at the process. Something that would make Nebuchadnezzar and Vespasian and even Torquemada scratch their head of why would you hurt yourself to hurt them? That's not the way the calculation is supposed to go. As I mentioned in my debate ongoing with Natan, the Romans only hurt us because they thought it would be cheaper in the long run than if they didn't hurt us to the extent they did. The Nazis seemed to have no problem hurting us even when they knew it was hurting themselves, which does not seem to make sense. This is a new concept, new within that scale. The basic building blocks of genocide had begun already prior, but this was the first time it had been put to such deadly effect. Okay, the Nazis categorized not only Jews, but also the Roma, also people that were LGBTQ. Remember, there was an awful lot of research and investigation in the Weimar Republic into sexuality, which the Nazis quickly shut down and murdered. What's that? the disabled, people with different mental capacities. They had a long list of people that were considered, and great choice of word, subhuman. But here is the thing that we miss. Because that's the normal tale. I'm sure none of that sounds especially novel to anyone in this room, and probably not even to anyone who's currently watching. They didn't call us subhuman so that they could get away with killing us. They killed us to dominate those who were left alive. They cut off our head to put a noose around the head of their own population. The murder of others in genocidal fashion to its own detriment of the wealth, the economy, the betterment of the country is done in order to ensure the power of those who are pulling the trigger over those who remain. By creating a other, by creating the subhumans within a concept, you are not just going to hurt them, because honestly, people in power could care less about who is and who isn't on the subhuman list. Some may have their own unique hang-ups, hence Hitler's fascination with the Jews. But ultimately, it was about having an us and the others. And when they had the others, they were not just there to scapegoat to make everyone else feel good. They were there to scapegoat to make everyone else feel fortunate to still be alive. The victimization of others is a vehicle for victimizing those who count themselves lucky to not be the other. It is a tool for stripping the rights, the freedoms, the power of those who are left alive. We were never the object for the Nazi regime. Oh, there were sure some lunatics, some fanatics, devoted people who really did believe the party line, that Jews were somehow an actual infectious vermin. But the vast majority could have cared less about who it was, as long as they were on the correct side, and as long as everyone else recognized their life hung by a thread. With the blink of an eye, you could be labeled a dissident. You could be labeled one of those. Someone could dig up some falsified family record, and all of a sudden you're tainted by a drop of blood. Maybe we needed to increase that purity measure. Maybe we needed to do something a little more. And in fact, over and over again within these types of regimes that think this way, the definition of who is the right person and who is the wrong person changes. Because it's never about an objective right and wrong. And once we get rid of the wrong, we're all going to be all right. It doesn't stop. People who run this type of con game are not doing it because they have objectively sit down and analyzed the information and come to the conclusion that if only we got rid of the Muslims, if only we got rid of the blacks, the gays, the trans, that if only we got rid of those things, then the data tells me that our society will flourish in a golden age. They don't do the math. They don't sit down and rationally calculate exactly how many need to be murdered in order to propel their regime into a beautiful utopia. They just know that there needs to be someone that we can stand against the wall and shoot, so all the people behind us don't shoot us. That if we cannot terrorize a group, then we cannot retain our dominion over the rest of the group. This is the tool for how you control a large group of people. Children develop this instinctually. It's called bullying. You pick on one kid so that all the other kids consider themselves lucky. And then the other kids will do what you tell them to. At least I'm not him. At least I'm not the one with my head in the toilet. At least I'm not the one who's being shamed on social media and told to kill myself. I'm part of the good group. Yeah, it's true that they still treat me like dirt, but they don't treat me like that. Victimizing others is a vehicle for victimizing those who don't realize they are the true target of this activity. Which is why when those who are not the current victims, those who currently do not have the crosshairs painted upon them, when they don't stand up for those who are the targets, they are the greatest fools. And they are the ones who may still chant, never again, never again, never again, but not recognize that just because the target is on someone else over there that maybe you don't understand, maybe you don't even like, maybe you had a bad incident once with one of those people. They don't seem to recognize that by consistently having a system that will paint targets on others, you are the true object of exploitation as well. That you are being kept down by a system that perpetuates the continual need for the next victim, the next target, the next outside group, the next other. That there has to be a constant fear of someone else that needs to be exterminated in order for you to be kept properly in line. Because you need to have your world shaped by this concept of fear. The fear of these boogeymen and the fear that you might be next. So you better tick all the boxes and follow the party line. You better make sure that you're still good. Make sure you properly digest whatever propaganda is coming out among those that seem to be choosing who is and who isn't okay right now. Because you know, you want to stay okay. And you know in your heart of hearts that it's a flip of a coin. When we say never again, it is not about checking ourselves for targets. It is not about checking for body counts of others. It is about checking if there is a deliberate effort to systematically and ruthlessly paint another group or groups as being the villain, as being subhuman, as not worthy of the same rights, respects, and dignities as everyone else. That as soon as you begin to see that there are those who are willing to give rights to some and take them from others, never again. That is the seed of genocide. Not the war of Nebuchadnezzar and Vespasian, not even the Crusades, not even the Inquisition. All of those still had some rational component of thinking of what they believed would be best for their current system of empire building and such. But these are people willing to sacrifice wealth for power. These are people who have done the calculation and said, I know this will hurt us financially, but it will propel me forward politically. Those are the people who lay the tracks that lead to Auschwitz. The Napoleons are reprehensible, terrible, and warmongers. They do not build concentration camps. Nebuchadnezzar, as terrible and rapacious as he was, did not build concentration camps. It takes those who want power over all else, who would rather rule in a kingdom of ashes than be a happy citizen in a true paradise for all. They are the ones who will seek the lever with which they can pry apart the cohesion of people, the goodwill of humanity, which is our natural state. And they will work that lever back and forth, until they can separate one group from another. And if it doesn't seem to be a big enough chasm for them to be able to grab hold of, to use as that lever for their own climb in the political ladder, then they'll throw that crowbar into another gap and split it there, and another, dividing and dividing, because they know that if we are divided, we are afraid and weak. And that when we are united, we are strong. We can be fearless, and we don't need people like that telling us what to fear. When we say never again, this is what we must mean. It has to be clear in our mind. I see someone targeted, not because of a crime they committed, not because of some violence they perpetrated, they individually, but because they belong to a group that someone has decided to paint as the problem. When you see that, that is the kindling of the next Shoah. Sounds melodramatic, I know. But that's what it is to be a watchman. When those rangers sit in those towers looking out for sparks, for fires, they don't wait until it is already engulfing the forest to call it in. They go down and they put it out immediately, lest it become an inferno. We see again and again in our current society those who would seek to divide us from each other, those who would seek to paint entire groups because of their race, their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation, as somehow being the problem, as somehow being unworthy of the same rights, respect, dignity as the good people. Those are the people building the next Shoah. If we stand up, though, never again.